In today's episode, we're diving into the most horrifying snake attacks ever recorded. From an accomplished herpetologist who believed the snake handed to him was non-venomous, to a wildlife rescuer who underestimated the wrath of a protective mother python. It was October 12, 2014, and the abandoned warehouse in Miami's industrial district sat silent in the pre-dawn darkness. Inside the cavernous space, rows of makeshift enclosures housed some of the world's most dangerous reptiles, their presence hidden from authorities by layers of false permits and forged documentation. The air was thick with the smell of reptile musk and the constant hum of heating systems, while shadows danced across concrete walls lined with terrariums and snake cages. This was Carlos Mendez's domain, a carefully concealed operation that smuggled exotic animals into the lucrative American black market. At 36, Carlos had been involved in the illegal exotic animal trade for 8 years, building a network of suppliers and buyers that stretched from Miami to New York. His operation specialized in rare and dangerous species that legitimate dealers couldn't or wouldn't handle. Venomous snakes, massive constrictors, and protected species that commanded premium prices from wealthy collectors. Carlos had survived numerous close calls with deadly animals, developing a reputation for fearlessness that bordered on recklessness. His overconfidence had grown with each successful deal, leading him to take increasingly dangerous shortcuts. The warehouse held dozens of illegal specimens, but none was more valuable or more dangerous than the massive male African rock python he had recently acquired from a contact in Nigeria. The 18-foot snake was worth over $50,000 to the right buyer, but it had proven to be extremely aggressive and difficult to handle. African rock pythons are among the most aggressive python species in the world, known for their unpredictable temperament and incredible strength. Native to sub-Saharan Africa, they are apex predators capable of taking prey as large as antelopes and young crocodiles. Unlike their more docile Asian cousins, African rock pythons retain their wild instincts even after years in captivity, viewing humans as potential threats or prey. Their constricting power can generate over 100 pounds of pressure per square inch, and their strike speed is faster than most people can react to. That night, Carlos had arranged to deliver the python to a private collector in Orlando who was willing to pay cash with no questions asked. The buyer was scheduled to arrive at dawn, giving Carlos only a few hours to sedate the massive snake and prepare it for transport. To save money and avoid involving additional people in the illegal transaction, Carlos had decided to handle the dangerous procedure alone. Carlos entered the python's enclosure carrying a syringe loaded with veterinary sedative, planning to inject the snake and then transfer it to a shipping container. The 200-pound python was coiled in the corner of its reinforced cage, its dark brown and gold patterns making it nearly invisible in the dim lighting. The snake's head was raised and alert, its muscular body tensed for action. The attack was instantaneous and overwhelming. The moment Carlos stepped within striking range, the massive python launched itself across the enclosure with explosive force. Its enormous head slammed into Carlos's chest, knocking him backward against the cage wall as 200 pounds of muscle began wrapping around his body. The syringe flew from his hand as the python's coils encircled his torso and arms, the snake's grip tightening with crushing force. The constriction was methodical and relentless. The python's powerful body worked in waves, each loop finding purchase around Carlos' ribcage, waist, and neck. Carlos's ribs began cracking under the strain as the snake's muscles contracted in powerful pulses, each squeeze tighter than the last. His desperate struggles only triggered the python's instincts to constrict harder. Carlos's screams echoed through the empty warehouse as the python's grip became a deadly vice that compressed his chest cavity and cut off his air supply. Within minutes, Carlos's movement ceased as the massive python's embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. Then the consumption process began. The python's jaws unhinged with mechanical precision, stretching impossibly wide as the snake began working Carlos's body head first into its throat. Carlos's business partner discovered the gruesome scene 2 days later when Carlos failed to show up for their planned meeting. The investigation uncovered the entire smuggling operation, leading to multiple arrests and the seizure of dozens of illegal animals. It was a long holiday weekend in May, and Oliver Baker and his family were looking forward to a relaxing few days at their holiday home on Alabama's Lewis Smith Lake. It had been a year of hard work, and the chance to unwind surrounded by the peaceful wilderness of Walker County was just what they needed. The lake, known for its clear waters and rich wildlife, was the perfect setting for their getaway. It was also a special trip because the family had recently adopted a puppy, a lively Labrador who was bound to make the weekend even more memorable. But beneath the calm, a hidden threat waited, ready to disrupt their idyllic escape. Oliver, at 52 years old, worked in water quality control for the city of Northport. A local through and through, he had grown up in Birmingham, just a short drive from the lake, and was well known and well liked by everyone in town. His generous nature and willingness to lend a hand made him a pillar of the community. He had 2 young sons who looked up to him with admiration, and his loving wife Terry supported him in everything he did. This weekend was meant to be a break from their usual routine, a time to relax, play, and enjoy each other's company. The holiday home itself was perched on a stone patio overlooking the shimmering lake, surrounded by dense woodland. Deer, raccoons, and even the occasional fox roamed the area, though the surrounding forest was also home to copperhead snakes, common residents of the Alabama woodlands. These snakes were not typically aggressive, but they were venomous, and their camouflage against the forest floor made them difficult to spot. Oliver stepped out onto the back patio, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. He marveled at how peaceful the day was. The sun was warm, the air cool and crisp, and the gentle sounds of birds chirping filled the space around him. The puppy, full of energy, raced around the yard, eager to explore everything the new environment had to offer. Oliver, enjoying the moment of calm, decided to take the puppy for a walk down to the lakeshore, a familiar routine they had done many times before. The winding path along the water was the perfect place to stretch his legs and take in the beauty of the lake. As he stepped onto the stone patio, Oliver didn't notice the copperhead coiled just beneath his feet. Blending seamlessly with the stone, it lay basking in the warmth of the sun, its body stretched out in the stillness. Barely noticeable, it was just another part of the natural landscape. The puppy, oblivious to the danger, dashed toward the water, excitement driving her every move. Oliver smiled, following her with a sense of ease, ready for their usual stroll along the lakeshore. But as his foot left the safety of the patio, a sharp sting shot through his left leg. At first, he thought it was a brush against a thorn or sharp object, but when he looked down, his heart dropped. The copperhead, its tongue flicking in and out, had struck. Pain exploded in his leg, burning through him like a bolt of lightning. He staggered back, momentarily unsteady as he registered what had happened. His pulse quickened, sweat forming on his forehead. The venom spread rapidly, tightening his chest and shortening his breath. The attack was underway, leaving no time to process or react. Without thinking, Oliver staggered back to their lake house, pain flaring with every step. His family, startled by the sudden distress, was quick to react. His sons rushed to his side while Terry, fighting panic, called for help. One of the boys sprinted outside and saw the snake still coiled in the corner of the patio, flicking its tongue and watching the family with unwavering eyes. It hadn't moved. His heart pounding, the boy quickly returned to the house, knowing his father's life was slipping away with every passing second. Within moments, Oliver's condition worsened. The venom had begun to spread quickly and he struggled to breathe. He clutched his chest, gasping for air, and collapsed to the floor. The family, helpless in the face of the unfolding tragedy, did everything they could, starting CPR on him as they waited for the paramedics to arrive. While a copperhead bite is rarely fatal, it causes excruciating pain, swelling, and nausea. In most cases, people recover with medical attention, but Oliver's reaction was different. The venom sent his body into shock and his organs began to shut down. Despite the paramedics' swift response, Oliver slipped into anaphylactic shock, a rare but often fatal reaction. His heart stopped before they could stabilize him. The family watched in helpless despair as Oliver was rushed to a nearby school playing field where a helicopter was meant to airlift him to the University of Alabama at Birmingham Hospital. But Oliver's condition was so critical that he was deemed unfit to fly. Instead, he was transported by ambulance to Jasper Hospital. His family, gathered in the waiting room, clung to hope. But as Oliver's body continued to deteriorate, the doctors could do nothing to save him. On Memorial Day, just 3 days after the snake bite, Oliver died in the hospital. The news of his death devastated his family and community. What had started as a joyful weekend getaway ended in heartbreak. His family struggled to comprehend how an ordinary afternoon walk by the lake had led to such an unimaginable loss. It was February 14, 2013, and the Florida Everglades stretched endlessly under the pale winter sun. A vast wilderness of sawgrass marshes and cypress swamps that had become ground zero for one of America's most devastating ecological disasters. Deep in the backcountry of the national park, where airboat trails disappeared into maze-like channels and cell phone signals vanished entirely, wildlife control specialist Mark Johnson tracked his most dangerous quarry through the shallow waters and dense vegetation. At 44, Mark had been hunting invasive Burmese pythons in the Everglades for 5 years as part of the state's aggressive removal program. These massive Asian constrictors, originally released or escaped from the exotic pet trade, had established a breeding population that was devastating native wildlife throughout South Florida. Mark took pride in capturing the snakes alive for research purposes rather than killing them outright, believing that studying their behavior patterns could help develop more effective control strategies. Recent months have been difficult for Mark personally. A messy divorce had left him financially strained and emotionally isolated, leading him to take on more dangerous solo assignments to maximize his earnings from the state bounty program. His colleagues had expressed concerns about his increasingly reckless approach to python capture, but Mark's success rate was impressive, and he had developed techniques for single-handedly subduing snakes that most specialists wouldn't attempt without backup. Burmese pythons in the Everglades have grown to enormous sizes due to the subtropical climate and abundant prey. These apex predators have virtually no natural enemies in Florida, allowing them to reach lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 250 pounds. Female pythons are particularly dangerous during breeding season, when they become extremely aggressive in defending their nests and territory. Their constricting power can crush the bones of large mammals, and their patient hunting style makes them nearly impossible to detect until they strike. That morning, Mark had received reports of an unusually large python sighting in the remote area of the park where several endangered bird species were nesting. The snake had been spotted by researchers who estimated its length at over 17 feet, making it one of the largest specimens reported in the area. Mark saw this as an opportunity to capture a prize specimen that could provide valuable research data while earning him a substantial bounty payment. Mark tracked the massive female python to a secluded hammock surrounded by shallow water and dense vegetation. The snake was enormous, easily 17 feet long and weighing an estimated 220 pounds. Her golden brown patterns perfectly camouflaged against the dry grass and palmetto fronds. She was coiled near what appeared to be a nest site, her massive head raised in alert as she sensed Mark's approach through the swamp. Mark approached the python without proper capture equipment, believing his experience would allow him to subdue her using improvised techniques he had developed over years of solo hunting. He failed to recognize the signs that this was a protective mother defending her nest. The aggressive posturing, the way she tracked his movements, the subtle coiling that preceded a defensive strike. His overconfidence had blinded him to the extreme danger he was walking into. The attack came with devastating swiftness. The protective mother python struck at Mark with explosive force, her massive head slamming into his chest and knocking him backward into the shallow water. Before he could recover, 220 pounds of muscle was wrapping around his body, the snake's coils encircling his torso and legs with crushing force that drove the air from his lungs. The python's powerful body dragged Mark deeper into the swamp, where the snake could use the water and vegetation to help overpower her prey. Mark's desperate attempts to reach his radio were cut short as the python's coils tightened around his chest, compressing his ribcage and making breathing impossible. The constriction increased with each of Mark's struggles, the snake's muscles responding to the movement with increased pressure. Mark's ribs cracked audibly under the immense pressure as the python's grip tightened like a living vice. His spine compressed as the snake's coils worked their way around his neck, cutting off blood flow to his brain while simultaneously crushing his internal organs. The murky swamp water made his struggles even more desperate as he fought against both the python's crushing embrace and the threat of drowning. Within minutes, Mark's movements ceased as the massive python's constriction stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. The snake maintained her grip for nearly an hour, ensuring her perceived threat was completely neutralized before beginning the slow process of consumption. The python's jaws unhinged with mechanical precision as she began working Mark's body into her throat, using the buoyancy of the water to help swallow prey much larger than her head. Mark's airboat was discovered empty by park rangers several hours later when he failed to check in at his scheduled time. Despite extensive searches involving helicopters, tracking dogs, and dozens of volunteers, his body was never recovered. The massive python had likely consumed him entirely and retreated deeper into the vast swampland, leaving no trace of her victim. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission conducted a thorough investigation, ruling Mark's disappearance an occupational hazard of python removal work in remote areas. New safety protocols were implemented, requiring python hunters to work in pairs and carry emergency beacons when operating in isolated locations. Mark's death sent shockwaves through Florida's python removal community, where he was remembered as skilled but increasingly reckless in his final months. His ex-wife received his life insurance payout, and a memorial fund was established to support the families of wildlife control specialists killed in the line of duty. Eugene DeLeon was no stranger to danger. For 60 years, he had spent his life working with snakes, particularly rattlesnakes, creatures that made most people uneasy. But to Eugene, they weren't just dangerous animals, they were beautiful, misunderstood, and worth protecting. His knowledge of reptiles extended beyond snakes. Turtles, lizards, even crocodiles. If it had scales, Eugene was the man to go to. He had spent decades sharing his expertise, traveling across the country, educating people about these often feared creatures. It was May in Texas, and Eugene was back at the Rattlesnake Roundup Festival for the 6th year in a row. The festival, a yearly celebration of rattlesnakes and other reptiles, drew thousands of visitors from all over. It wasn't just a spectacle, it was a platform for education. Eugene was one of the main attractions. His booth, filled with snakes of various sizes, was always crowded. People gathered around to watch him work, fascinated by his calm demeanor as he handled the deadly reptiles with ease. The first day had gone smoothly. Eugene spent hours showing off his prized rattlers, explaining their behavior and teaching the crowd about safety. The sun beat down, the air thick with the sounds of laughter, music, and the occasional hiss of a snake. Eugene was in his element, but as the second day wore on, the crowd began to grow restless. By the afternoon, the festival grounds were packed. The noise was constant, a mixture of shouting vendors, children running around, and the clatter of food stands. The scent of frying food mixed with the dust in the air. Among the many snakes Eugene brought to the festival, one stood out, a massive 8-foot-long rattlesnake that he had been carefully raising for years. It was a creature that demanded respect, and Eugene was proud to show it off. The snake had always been calm in public, but today there was something different about it. As Eugene approached its enclosure, the snake's tongue flicked out rapidly, and its body coiled tighter. Something was off. Eugene noticed it, but he didn't let it show. He moved with the same slow precision he always did, taking the long-handled stick to coax the snake out of its box. The crowd fell silent as he carefully lifted the snake, holding it high for all to see. It seemed almost serene for a moment, its scales glistening in the sunlight, its rattle silent. But then, without warning, it struck. The attack was swift, almost unnoticed by the crowd. The snake struck, its fangs sinking into Eugene's shoulder. A gasp rippled through the onlookers, but Eugene didn't flinch. With the same calm demeanor he always maintained, he gently returned the snake to its box and stepped back from the display. His hand instinctively went to his shoulder. The heat from the venom spread quickly as expected. His shoulder burned intensely and the pain shot down his arm, sharp and unrelenting. Despite the panic stirring in his chest, Eugene remained calm, walking steadily toward the medic station. The chaos of the festival around him seemed distant, his focus narrowing to the searing pain, the rhythmic pulse of his heartbeat, and the growing heaviness in his limbs. It didn't take long for the effects to set in. By the time Eugene reached the medic station, his vision was blurry and his breathing was ragged. The medics moved quickly, but Eugene knew there was little they could do. The venom was already in his system, working its way through his bloodstream. He tried to speak, to warn them, but the words wouldn't come. He could only point to his shoulder, indicating where he'd been bitten. There was no anti-venom at the festival. Eugene knew that well. It wasn't something that could be carried around easily. Anti-venom had to be prepared fresh, and it took hours to produce. Eugene's mind, sharp as ever, knew the reality. His chances of survival were slim. The venom would spread fast, and there was nothing anyone could do in time. His chest tightened, his breath became shallow, and his limbs started to go numb. A helicopter arrived within minutes, the roar of its blades cutting through the noise of the festival. The medics lifted Eugene into the air, his body already growing colder as life drained from him. But Eugene never spoke again. His eyes fluttered closed, and the world around him faded into darkness. As the helicopter made its way toward the hospital, the festival continued below, unaware of the tragedy unfolding above. The crowds, lost in their excitement, had no idea that one of their own, one of the people who had taught them so much about the very snakes they came to see, was slipping away. Back at the festival, word of Eugene's bite spread slowly. The medics worked tirelessly to keep him stable, but as the hours passed, hope faded. The hospital was ready, but Eugene never regained consciousness. He died in the air, long before the anti-venom could reach him. His death rocked the community, yet for his family there were no questions, only the loss of a man who had died doing what he loved. His passing was a tragic reminder of the dangers of the animals he dedicated his life to. August 19, 2014 was a humid day in Ecuador's Esmeraldas province. The rainforest canopy dripped with moisture from an early morning shower, creating a symphony of water droplets hitting leaves. For Ramon Estevez, this was the perfect backdrop for his eco-tourism adventure. The 45-year-old Spanish accountant had always been drawn to wild places. His modest apartment back home was filled with souvenirs from his travels. A tribal mask from Papua New Guinea, a ceremonial knife from the Amazon, photographs of mountain summits from 4 continents. This 3-week journey through Ecuador's most biodiverse regions was a celebration of sorts. After 20 years of dedicated work, he had finally arranged a sabbatical year to pursue his dream of visiting the world's great wilderness areas. This particular morning, Ramon had joined a guided hike through a remote section of the Ecuadorian rainforest. The group consisted of Ramon, 2 other tourists, and their experienced local guide. They had been walking for nearly 3 hours, with the guide pointing out various medicinal plants and wildlife along the established trail. The guide had warned them about the dangers of the rainforest, including the South African bushmaster, locally known as Vuragosa or warty snake, due to its distinctive ridged scales. These vipers were masters of camouflage, with their brown and tan patterned bodies blending perfectly with the forest floor. Growing up to 12 feet long, bushmasters were the largest venomous snakes in the Americas and possess a potent hemotoxic venom that destroys tissue and prevents blood clotting. Around midday, the group paused near a small clearing. While the others rested, Ramon noticed a splash of color just off the trail, a rare orchid species he had been hoping to photograph. Without alerting the guide, he stepped carefully off the path, camera in hand, moving toward the base of a large ceiba tree where the orchids grew. Reaching the orchid, Ramon crouched down, adjusting his camera settings to capture the flower's intricate details. Satisfied with his photographs, Ramon prepared to return to the group. As he shifted his weight to stand, his boot disturbed a thick layer of leaf litter near the base of the tree. The South American bushmaster, Lachesis muta, had been perfectly camouflaged among the brown and tan leaf litter. At up to 12 feet long, the bushmaster is the largest pit viper in the Americas, with heat-sensing pits that allow it to detect warm-blooded prey with precision. Despite its size, its pattern of tan and brown scales creates perfect camouflage among fallen leaves. This snake was likely hunting for small mammals that frequented the area. Bushmasters are primarily nocturnal hunters, but this one had remained in its daytime resting spot rather than retreating to a burrow. The bushmaster, disturbed from its resting place, reacted defensively. Before Ramon could process what was happening, the viper struck, driving its fangs deep into his lower leg, just above his hiking boot. The pain was immediate and intense, like 2 hot needles being driven into his calf muscle. Ramon cried out, stumbling backward and falling against a tree trunk. The snake, having delivered its defensive strike, slithered rapidly away into the undergrowth. Ramon's shout alerted the guide, who was at his side within seconds, the rest of the group hanging back in horror. The guide immediately recognized the severity of the situation upon seeing the distinctive bushmaster retreating into the underbrush. Unlike some venomous snakes that deliver dry bites without venom, bushmasters typically injected large amounts of venom with each strike, an evolutionary adaptation for killing prey like rabbits and agwits. The guide applied a pressure bandage and instructed the other tourists to help carry Ramon back toward the trailhead where their boat was docked. Unlike the neurotoxic venoms of cobras or mambas that attack the nervous system, the Bushmaster's hemotoxic venom worked by destroying tissue and preventing blood from clotting, a slower but equally deadly mechanism. The effects of the venom manifested within 30 minutes. Ramon's leg had swollen dramatically, with bruising spreading upward from the bite site as blood vessels ruptured beneath the skin. By the 1 hour mark, he was disoriented and struggling to remain conscious as internal bleeding began. His blood pressure dropped dangerously as fluids leaked from his damaged blood vessels. Despite the guide's best effort to reach help quickly, Ramon's condition deteriorated with each passing hour. His breathing became labored and his pulse weakened as the venom circulated through his system. So they made the decision at that critical moment: get Ramon to the hospital as quick as possible. With all the strength they had, they assisted Ramon, carrying him shoulder to shoulder to the river where their only vehicle is located. By the 3 hour mark, they reached the river where their boat was docked. Ramon was barely responsive, his breathing shallow and irregular. Carlos immediately radioed ahead to the medical station, describing Ramon's symptoms and requesting that anti-venom be prepared. The boat journey downriver took another excruciating hour. By the time they reached the medical station, Ramon had lost consciousness completely. The rural clinic had basic anti-venom supplies, but not the specific Bushmaster anti-venom needed for optimal treatment. The doctor administered what they had available, a polyvalent antivenom designed to work against several pit viper species, while arranging emergency transport to a hospital in Esmeralda City. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Ramon Estevez was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Ramon had succumbed to the venom's effects. The autopsy revealed extensive internal hemorrhaging and tissue necrosis consistent with Bushmaster envenomation. Local authorities used Ramon's case to emphasize the importance of staying on marked trails and always remaining within sight of guides when in snake territory. It was July 20th, 2022 when 29-year-old Elliot Sensman from Pennsylvania began his day as usual, tending to his beloved snakes. Known for his deep passion for reptiles, Elliot spent his days rescuing and rehabilitating snakes that others had abandoned. He had a special bond with these animals, and his expertise was unmatched. He handled everything from small garter snakes to the massive boa constrictors and pythons that others feared. But on this particular morning, as he entered the room to care for his snakes, he had no inkling that his life was about to end in the most tragic way. Elliot's love for snakes began at the age of 10. Over the years, he had developed an extensive knowledge of their care, understanding their needs and behaviors. He had spent the last 6 years focusing on rescuing snakes that had been abused or neglected, giving them a chance to heal and find new homes. His collection included several large snakes, but there was one in particular that required extra caution. An 18-foot boa constrictor which had a history of aggression. It had been rescued from a home where it had been poorly treated, leaving it distrustful of humans. Despite its size and temperament, Elliot had always approached the snake with the utmost care. He knew the risks but was undeterred by the challenge. That morning, like many others, Elliot began his routine by checking on the snakes. His first task was feeding and cleaning the enclosures, ensuring each snake was comfortable and properly cared for. As he moved from cage to cage, everything seemed normal until he reached the boa constrictor's enclosure. He paused. The snake's behavior had been erratic over the past few days, more restless, more unpredictable. It slithered in tight, erratic loops, pressing against the glass as though it couldn't find a place to settle. A slight unease crept over Elliot, but he dismissed it. The boa was still adjusting to its new life after years of abuse. He had seen this kind of restlessness before, especially in snakes with such a troubled past. But today, the snake's behavior was different. Its movements were more intense than usual. Elliot opened the cage slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the snake. It hissed, its tongue flicking the air, but that was typical. His hands were steady as he reached inside, familiar with the snake's temperament. Yet its movements were sharper, more agitated. Elliot remained cautious, aware that even well-known reptiles could become unpredictable when stressed. And then the snake struck. It lunged from the shadows, its powerful coils wrapping around Elliot's body with swift precision. Elliot's hands fumbled as he tried to respond, but the snake's grip tightened quickly. The boa constrictor's massive coils pressed against his chest, constricting with increasing pressure, squeezing the air from his lungs. Elliot's grandmother, who had been in the other room, heard the commotion and rushed to help. What she found was a horrifying sight. Her grandson, once full of life and energy, was now lying on the floor, his face turning pale as the snake tightened its grip around his neck. She screamed for help, but in the chaos it seemed there was no time. Elliot, always so cautious, had misjudged the situation. It was unclear whether it was already too late. With shaky hands, she dialed 911. When the Upper Macungie Township Police arrived, they found Elliot unconscious, showing symptoms of a heart attack. The snake's grip was still strong, its coils twisted around his neck, constricting further as it sensed its prey was weakening. The officers were paralyzed with indecision. The snake was massive, easily over 15 feet in length, and they couldn't risk shooting it in the head. A miss could injure Elliot. After a tense few moments, the officers took action, firing at the snake's body. The rounds weren't enough to kill the animal, but they were enough to make it loosen its grip, allowing the officers to pull it off Elliot. As soon as the snake was removed, paramedics rushed to Elliot's side. He was quickly transported to Lehigh Valley Hospital, Cedar Crest. But despite their best efforts, Elliot never regained consciousness. For 4 days, he remained in critical care, fighting for his life, but his body had already been deprived of oxygen for too long. On July 24th, Elliot Sensman passed away. The cause of death was later confirmed as anoxic brain injury caused by the constriction. The news of Elliot's death sent shockwaves through the community. Friends, family, and colleagues were left in disbelief. Elliot had dedicated his life to rescuing snakes, understanding their nature better than anyone else. He had always been the person people turned to when a snake was in trouble, and now one of the very creatures he loved so much had taken his life. His mother, Heather, couldn't understand how something so tragic could happen to someone so careful, so dedicated. "My son was unique and kind," she said in an interview. "He should still be with us today." In the months that followed, the tragic incident became a topic of discussion, with many calling for more regulation of exotic pets, particularly snakes. While Elliot's love for reptiles was undeniable, his death highlighted the potential consequences of caring for such creatures, especially when their behavior is unpredictable due to past trauma. The legacy of his work, however, would live on in the countless snakes he had helped, and the awareness he had raised about the importance of proper care and rehabilitation for animals in need. Elliot Sensman's untimely death was a stark reminder of the risks involved in rescuing dangerous reptiles. However, not all dangers come from the creatures one might expect. It was June 22, 2017, and the Indonesian rainforest of Sumatra shimmered in the oppressive tropical heat. Deep in the remote Lucer National Park, where ancient trees towered over a carpet of rotting vegetation and the air buzzed with the constant hum of insects, Dr. Lisa Park moved quietly through the undergrowth with their research equipment. The jungle around her was alive with the calls of gibbons and the rustle of small mammals. But Lisa's attention was focused entirely on tracking the behavior patterns of the forest's most formidable predator. At 28, Lisa was a graduate student in herpetology at the University of California, conducting field research for her PhD dissertation on python hunting behavior. She had been studying in Southeast Asia for 6 months, documenting the feeding patterns and territorial behavior of reticulated pythons in their natural habitat. Her research was groundbreaking, the first comprehensive study of how these massive constrictors adapted their hunting strategies to different prey species and environmental conditions. Lisa's methodology was unconventional and risky. While most researchers studied pythons from a safe distance using camera traps and radio telemetry, she preferred direct observation and hands-on data collection. She worked alone to avoid disturbing the snake's natural behavior, often spending days tracking individual specimens through dense jungle terrain. Her professors had expressed concerns about her methods, but Lisa's preliminary results were so promising that they had approved her continued solo fieldwork. Reticulated pythons in Sumatra grow to enormous sizes due to the abundance of prey and lack of natural predators. These apex constrictors are capable of taking prey as large as sun bears and orangutans, using their incredible strength and patience to ambush victims at water sources and game trails. They're most dangerous when they're hungry or protecting territory, and their feeding cycles can be unpredictable, with some individuals going months between meals before entering aggressive hunting states. That morning, Lisa had discovered what appeared to be the perfect research opportunity: a massive female reticulated python that had recently fed and was resting in a sunny clearing. The snake was enormous, easily 20 feet long and weighing an estimated 280 pounds, her body visibly swollen from a recent meal. Lisa assumed the python would be docile and sluggish after feeding, making this an ideal opportunity to collect measurements and behavioral data without disturbing the animal. Lisa approached the python slowly, her camera and measuring equipment ready, believing the snake's post-feeding state would make her safe to observe at close range. She had studied python behavior extensively and knew that recently fed snakes typically showed little interest in additional prey. But as she moved closer, positioning herself for photographs and measurements, she failed to recognize the subtle signs that this python's feeding was incomplete. The attack was swift and unexpected. The python, still driven by active feeding instincts, struck at Lisa with explosive force when she moved within range. The massive snake's head slammed into her chest, knocking her to the ground as 280 pounds of muscle began wrapping around her body. Lisa's equipment scattered as the python's coils encircled her torso and legs, the snake's grip tightening with each breath she tried to take. The python's powerful body dragged Lisa toward a nearby stream, where the snake could use the water to help manage its oversized prey. Lisa's desperate attempts to reach her radio were cut short as the python's coils compressed her chest, making breathing impossible. The constriction was methodical and relentless, each loop of the snake's body finding purchase around her rib cage and neck. Lisa's ribs cracked under the immense pressure as the python's muscles contracted in powerful waves. The snake's grip became a deadly vice that compressed her chest cavity and cut off blood flow to her brain. Her struggles only triggered the python's instincts to constrict harder, the massive snake responding to movement with increased pressure. Within minutes, Lisa's movement ceased as the python's crushing embrace stopped her heart. The consumption process began in the shallow water, where the python could use buoyancy to help swallow prey much larger than its head. The snake's jaws unhinged with mechanical precision, stretching impossibly wide as it began working Lisa's body into its throat. The process took most of the day, the python's elastic gullet expanding to accommodate its massive meal. Lisa's research team began searching when she failed to return to base camp that evening. They found her waterlogged equipment floating in the stream 2 days later, but her body was never recovered. Local authorities conducted a brief investigation, ruling her disappearance an accident related to dangerous wildlife research. The University of California established new safety protocols requiring all field researchers to work in pairs when studying large predators, and Lisa's preliminary research was published posthumously, contributing valuable data to the scientific understanding of python behavior. Her family established a memorial scholarship for young women pursuing careers in herpetology. It was May 2018, a warm Saturday in Texas. The morning sun had already heated the air as Jeremy Sutcliffe and his wife Jennifer worked together in their newly settled garden. The house was small but cozy, and the garden had been a bit neglected in the chaos of moving. Now that the boxes were finally unpacked, they decided to spend the day getting the yard into shape. It was a peaceful start, or so it seemed. But the unexpected was just moments away. Jennifer knelt beside a row of flower beds, pulling stubborn weeds from the soft soil. Her hands, dirt-streaked from hours of work, moved rhythmically. The scent of fresh earth filled the air, and the sunlight warmed her back as she carefully tended to the plants. Jeremy, meanwhile, was trimming the grass around the yard, checking the newly planted shrubs to make sure they were secure. Every so often, he would glance over at Jennifer, making sure she was okay. He knew about how much this quiet time meant to her and how she had been looking forward to setting up a relaxing garden space. A few feet from Jennifer, a few small trees lined the side of the house, their thin branches swaying gently in the breeze. The hum of distant traffic was the only sound that broke the peace. The dogs, small terriers, were roaming nearby, seemingly content with the stillness of the morning. Suddenly, Jennifer screamed. Jeremy turned sharply at the sound. He saw her backing away, eyes wide, as something slithered on the ground. His gaze darted to the source of her alarm. A large rattlesnake, its body coiled in the tall grass, was just inches from her feet. Its head was raised, its eyes locked on Jennifer. The rattling sound cut through the air, sharp and unmistakable. Jennifer took slow, cautious steps back, her hands still outstretched, trying to move away without provoking the snake. She called out to Jeremy for help, her voice sharp and urgent. At first, Jeremy thought she had just spotted a harmless garden snake, but as he moved closer, he saw the thick, patterned body of the western diamondback. His eyes locked on the raised head, its triangular shape unmistakable. This wasn't a small, harmless snake, it was a venomous one, and it was in a striking position. Without hesitation, Jeremy grabbed the nearest shovel, his hands steady despite the surge of urgency in his chest. He positioned himself between Jennifer and the snake. The rattle grew louder, warning him to stay away. But there was no choice now, he had to act. It was either his wife or the snake. With a swift, calculating swing, Jeremy aimed for the snake's head. The shovel hit with a sharp thud, severing the head clean from its body. For a moment, the snake's body twitched violently. Its headless form thrashed erratically in the grass, still moving as though it hadn't realized it was dead. Jeremy remained still, his eyes locked on the body, waiting for it to stop. The body twitched one last time and then went still. The rattling ceased. Jennifer, still watching from a safe distance, didn't move. The yard was quiet again, but the weight of what had happened still hung in the air. Jeremy and Jennifer exchanged a look but said nothing. They moved inside, leaving the garden behind. But the incident lingered in their minds, a reminder of the close call. After 10 minutes, the dogs needed to go out, and Jennifer decided it was safe enough. The yard was quiet and the sun was setting, but she didn't want to risk the dogs getting near the dead rattlesnake. She called Jeremy to move it. He nodded and walked to the garden. As he got closer, he saw the snake, motionless and coiled by the fence, seemingly lifeless. Jeremy grabbed the snake by the tail, carefully lowering it into a grocery bag while keeping his distance from its head. But as his hand closed around the snake's head, it struck. Its fangs sank deep into his hand, and venom surged into his veins instantly. Pain shot through his hand, and his fingers went numb as the venom burned through his bloodstream. He called out to Jennifer for help, but the situation had already spiraled out of control. Though the snake's body was lifeless in the bag, its head, still alive, had delivered a final vicious strike. Jeremy tried to free his hand, but the snake's grip was relentless. Using his other hand, he attempted to pry it loose, but in doing so, the fangs sank into his finger, releasing another wave of venom. He finally wrenched the snake off and flung it aside, but the damage was done. His vision blurred and the dizziness overtook him. His body grew heavy, his movements sluggish. He turned to Jennifer, his strength slipping away. Without hesitation, Jennifer moved swiftly to Jeremy, assisting him to the car while dialing 911. She conveyed the urgency to the operator, requesting immediate help. With no time to wait for assistance, they began to drive to the hospital. The 30-minute journey stretched on as Jeremy's breathing grew shallow, his body succumbing to the venom's effects. Jennifer kept her focus on the road, maintaining contact with the operator. Midway through the drive, Jeremy's condition worsened. He collapsed and a seizure ensued. Jennifer pulled over near a church and followed the operator's directions to perform CPR until emergency responders arrived. When the ambulance reached them, paramedics swiftly loaded Jeremy inside. On the way to the hospital, his condition worsened significantly. The team decided to stop and transfer him to a waiting helicopter. The airlift brought him to a hospital equipped to handle the escalating crisis, where doctors immediately began intensive treatment. Jeremy's blood pressure dropped sharply and organ failure began. Medical staff administered 26 doses of antivenom over several hours, but his condition showed minimal improvement. As a last resort, doctors induced a coma to stabilize his system. By the following evening, his vital signs improved slightly. Doctors decided to wake him from the coma. Jeremy opened his eyes, weakened but alive. The aftermath of the venom's effects induced severe kidney damage, multiple surgeries, and the amputation of 2 fingers. Despite these challenges, Jeremy survived. A month later, he was discharged from the hospital. Though chronic pain and lasting health issues remained, his survival marked a significant victory over the near-fatal encounter. Laura Hurst, a 36-year-old mother with a lifelong passion for snakes, had spent years cultivating a deep bond with the reptiles she cared for. Her connection to these creatures had always felt safe, even comforting. But on one fateful evening, as she reached for her most trusted reticulated python, that bond would take a terrifying turn, one that she could never have predicted. It was the autumn of 2019 in Oxford, Indiana, a small town where neighbors knew each other by name and houses lined the quiet streets. Among these houses on the North Dan Patch Drive stood a house that most avoided, though there was little to suggest it was anything but ordinary. The modest bungalow, painted a faded blue, held a secret. Inside, it was alive, not with people, but with reptiles. Over 140 snakes, large and small, filled rows of tanks, their sleek bodies moving in hypnotic patterns. For Benton County Sheriff Don Munson, this house was more than a hobby, it was a haven for his beloved collection. Among the residents was Simba, a 13-foot reticulated python and the crown jewel of Don's collection. While Don cared for these creatures with a careful hand, he'd learned to treat each one with respect. Handling these animals required both skill and caution. Even the gentlest of pythons could become unpredictable. Friends occasionally questioned the risks he took, reminding him of the power coiled beneath each snake's scales. But to Don, the thrill was worth it, and he carried on, trusting his experience and routine to keep him safe. But Don wasn't the only one enchanted by these creatures. His friend Laura Hurst shared his love for snakes. As a 36-year-old mother and fellow reptile enthusiast, Laura had been fascinated by wildlife since her childhood on a cattle farm. There, she often caught small garter snakes and marveled at their tiny, twisting forms. Over the years, her fascination had grown, and she eventually began to keep larger and more exotic species. Dawn's arrangement allowed her to house her own collection safely, and she visited twice a week to care for them, a routine she would soon wish she'd never started. Laura loved her time at the house, finding peace in the soft hum of the tank lights and the quiet rustling as snakes moved inside their enclosures. She had become familiar with each one's unique personality, knowing which needed gentle handling and which responded best when left undisturbed. These animals had become her companions, a world she alone could understand. Yet, even with her expertise, her confidence masked a danger she rarely considered. That Wednesday evening on October 30th, Laura arrived at the house as usual, parking her car in the driveway and stepping into the darkened interior. The lights in each tank cast an eerie glow in the dim rooms, shadows sliding over glass as she moved from tank to tank, checking on each of her snakes. Tonight, her focus was on her favorite, a sleek, muscular, 8-foot reticulated python she had raised from a juvenile. This snake had been calm for years, often allowing her to handle it without issue. But as she reached for it, a slight unease washed over her, something she couldn't quite explain. The snake was heavier than usual, and as she lifted it from the tank, its thick body draped over her shoulders like a live, warm scarf. Reticulated pythons are native to Southeast Asia and are among the longest snakes in the world, growing up to 20 feet and weighing as much as 165 pounds or 75 kilograms. Known for their strength, they kill by constriction rather than venom, wrapping around their prey and tightening until the animal suffocates. Despite the inherent danger in their predatory nature, they are kept as pets due to their relatively manageable care in captivity. Laura had handled them before, but tonight the snake's behavior was unusual. At first, the weight was familiar and reassuring, but gradually the python's grip tightened around her neck, its muscles pressed harder against her. The change was subtle, almost easy to miss. But as Laura shifted, trying to adjust the snake, its coils grew tighter, wrapping further around her neck and shoulders. She gently tried to loosen the grip, but the snake resisted. Its body was unyielding, a heavy loop that refused to let go. Laura struggled for air, her chest tight as the snake's coils tightened further. Her lips began to turn a deep shade of blue, and her eyes started to bulge as her breathing became increasingly labored. She couldn't scream for help, nor could she reach her phone. Everything was happening too fast. The pressure on her throat was suffocating, and the lack of oxygen caused her head to spin. As her vision blurred, a sense of helplessness washed over her. Within seconds, she slumped to the ground, her body going limp. The snake, unrelenting, continued to constrict around her, even though she was now motionless and unresponsive. Hours later, across the yard, Don noticed Laura's car still parked in the driveway as he looked out his window that evening. She usually finished her routine checks by now, so he decided to check in on her. Entering the house, he called her name. No response. He walked past the open tanks, his steps echoing through the silent rooms, until he entered the last room and found a scene that would haunt him forever. Laura was lying motionless on the floor, the snake's coils still draped loosely around her, its deadly grip now loosened, but too late. Don rushed forward, pulling the python away, his hands shaking as he checked for signs of life. He dialed emergency services, but his voice trembled as he spoke. It was already too late. Laura had been his friend, his confidant in the world of reptiles. Her death sent a shockwave through him, one he couldn't have predicted despite his years of handling snakes. Her passing was swift, merciless, and left him standing in a house that had once been filled with life, now quiet and empty, a cruel reminder of what had just occurred. In the aftermath of Laura's death, the community was shaken. Questions surfaced about Don's snake breeding operation. Had he followed the proper legal procedures? In Indiana, reticulated pythons were not regulated because they were not a native species, but there were no permits required, as long as the snakes were not venomous or endangered. Since 1978, 18 people in the U.S. have died from snake constriction, Yet incidents like Laura's were incredibly rare, often overshadowed by other dangers. Reptile enthusiasts pointed out that dogs caused far more injuries and deaths each year. Despite this, Laura's tragic fate brought national attention, and the town council quickly moved to introduce new regulations to ensure people were aware of who kept dangerous animals and where they were housed. October 9, 2016 dawned with a brilliant African sunrise, casting golden rays across the vast expanse of Luangwa Valley. The air was thick with humidity, promising another scorching day in the Zambian wilderness. For Dr. Eileen Moravec, this weather was perfect, ideal conditions for the cold-blooded subjects of her research to emerge from their nighttime hideaways. At 39, Eileen had dedicated her entire adult life to understanding the world's most misunderstood creatures. Growing up in a small town outside of Boston, she'd been fascinated by reptiles since finding a garden snake at age 7. While other girls collected dolls, Eileen filled notebooks with sketches of snakes, lizards, and turtles. Her bedroom walls weren't covered with posters of boy bands, but with scientific illustrations of reptile anatomy and distribution maps of venomous species across continents. Her parents had hoped it was just a phase, but by 22, she had graduated with honors in zoology, and by 28, she had earned her doctorate with groundbreaking research on venom evolution in African elapids. The Luangwa Valley Project was her dream assignment, 3 months of field research tracking and documenting the behavior patterns of some of Africa's deadliest snakes. She'd been particularly focused on the black mamba, a species whose reputation for aggression she believed was largely misunderstood. Her preliminary findings suggested that these sleek, lightning-fast predators were actually quite shy and preferred retreat over confrontation when given the option. In the evening before her fatal encounter, Dr. Eileen Moravec had shared her insights with Marcus about black mambas. She passionately explained that these creatures weren't the mindless killers people imagined, but sophisticated predators with complex behaviors. She believed that better understanding these behaviors could save both snake and human lives. Marcus admired Eileen's passion, but worried about her tendency to take calculated risks. She was meticulous about safety protocols, always wearing the proper boots, carrying anti-venom in their field kit, keeping compression bandages at hand. But she also believed that to truly understand these animals, one had to observe them in their natural state, undisturbed and behaving naturally. That morning, Eileen had been particularly excited. Their motion sensor cameras had captured footage of a large black mamba using the same basking site 3 days in a row, a perfect opportunity to observe natural behavior patterns. She packed her field journal, camera, and observation equipment with the careful precision that characterized all her work. The black mamba was Africa's longest venomous snake, capable of reaching lengths of up to 14 feet, though most averaged around 8 feet. Despite their name, they weren't actually black. Their scales ranged from olive to grayish brown. The black referred to the inky color inside their mouths, which they displayed when threatened. What made them particularly dangerous was their combination of highly potent neurotoxic venom and speed, capable of moving up to 12.5 miles per hour in short bursts. Following established protocol, Eileen and Marcus approached the basking site together, maintaining visual contact at all times. The site was a small clearing with a fallen log that had been rotting for years, creating the perfect micro-habitat for a variety of creatures. Eileen knelt beside the log, her movements slow and deliberate, while Marcus remained close by with their field kit open and ready. After several minutes of careful observation, Eileen saw no signs of the mamba. Following standard field procedure, she used her snake hook to gently lift a section of loose bark on the log, probing cautiously before each movement. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. As Eileen carefully lifted the bark, Marcus, standing just a few feet away, caught a flash of movement so quick it seemed almost like a trick of light. The black mamba, concealed in a hollow beneath the bark, erupted from its hiding place with explosive force. The snake's sleek body launched upward like a coiled spring releasing, its head moving faster than the human eye could track. Its mouth gaped open, revealing the characteristic black interior that gave the species its name, a glimpse of darkness that would be the last thing many victims ever saw. The first strike caught Eileen on her forearm, just above her protective glove. The mamba's fangs, nearly a quarter-inch long, penetrated her skin with surgical precision, injecting venom directly into her tissue. Eileen gasped, more from surprise than immediate pain, and instinctively pulled back her arm. This defensive movement triggered the mamba's second strike. The snake, now fully in defensive mode, targeted the exposed skin at Eileen's waist, where her field shirt had risen slightly. The fang sank deep, delivering a second dose of neurotoxic venom that would prove fatal. Marcus lunged forward with his snake hook, but the mamba had already retreated back into the log's recesses, its attack complete in less than 2 seconds. Eileen remained kneeling. She looked down at her arm where 2 small puncture wounds were already beginning to weep tiny beads of blood. A similar pair of punctures marked her side. The venom began its work immediately, though the full effects wouldn't be apparent for several minutes. Black mamba venom contains potent neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, gradually shutting down neural pathways and eventually leading to respiratory paralysis. Unlike some venoms that cause immediate excruciating pain, mamba venom's initial subtlety belies its deadly efficiency. When the emergency struck, Marcus implemented their emergency protocol while Eileen, still conscious, guided her own first aid procedures. Her hands remained steady as she directed Marcus to apply the pressure bandages, her scientific mind still functioning with remarkable clarity despite knowing what was coming. Marcus contacted emergency services via satellite phone, which connected successfully. He administered their field anti-venom kit, standard procedure for researchers working with highly venomous species in remote locations. Despite these prompt measures, the double bite from a large mamba had delivered a massive venom dose. Within 30 minutes, Eileen began experiencing the progressive symptoms of mamba envenomation. Tingling around the bite sites, followed by increasing difficulty swallowing and a heaviness in her limbs as the neurotoxins began affecting her nervous system. The emergency helicopter arrived 50 minutes after the bite, by which time Eileen was experiencing significant respiratory distress as the neurotoxins affected her diaphragm. The medical team administered additional anti-venom and placed her on ventilator support, but the venom's effects were advancing rapidly through her system. Throughout the emergency flight to the regional hospital, Eileen remained conscious, although the neurotoxins were gradually paralyzing her respiratory muscles. Despite maximum medical intervention, including multiple doses of antivenom and medical ventilation, she succumbed to her respiratory failure approximately 4 hours after the bite. It was early morning, September 11, 2001. While the United States was still sleeping, unaware of the tragedy about to unfold, Joseph Slewinski and his team were already deep in the jungles of Myanmar, a world away. It was a land of vast biodiversity and uncharted wilderness. For Joseph, this remote corner of Southeast Asia held the promise of discovery, the chance to add new species to the world's scientific catalog. At 38 years old, Joseph Slewinski was an accomplished herpetologist, a scientist who studied reptiles and amphibians, especially snakes. His passion for these cold-blooded creatures began in his childhood, when, rather than playing with kittens or puppies, young Joseph was fascinated by the slithering creatures that others feared. By the time he reached adulthood, Joseph had earned a reputation for being one of the foremost experts on venomous snakes. His dedication to field work took him across the globe: Mexico, Peru, Costa Rica, and the Bahamas. But Myanmar held a special place in his heart. It was a biodiversity hotspot, home to species found nowhere else. It was here that Joseph's lifelong dream of discovering new species came to fruition. Over the course of several expeditions, he had identified 18 new reptiles, and he had no intention of stopping. The expedition of September 2001 was supposed to be just another chapter in his career, albeit one filled with unique challenges. Delayed by funding issues and the monsoon season, the team finally set off into the jungle, navigating through thick mud and torrential rains. They battled not just the elements but also the logistical difficulties of conducting research in such a remote location. There were over 90 porters carrying supplies, and Joseph's team included biologists, students, and assistants from Myanmar, all under his careful direction. Despite the obstacles, Joseph's enthusiasm for the job remained infectious. However, according to Mark Moffat, a tropical biologist on the team, there were signs that Joseph was wearing down. The constant rain, the difficult terrain, and the stress of leading such a large team had begun to take a toll. His usual vivacity was noticeably diminished. Still, he pressed on, unaware that on September 11th, his journey would take a tragic turn. It was around 7 a.m. when one of the Burmese field assistants approached Joseph with a specimen bag containing a snake. The assistant explained that a snake of the same species had bitten him the day before, but he believed it was non-venomous. Joseph, familiar with the wide variety of snakes in the area, didn't hesitate. He reached into the bag to handle the creature. As his hands reached inside the bag, the snake struck. The bite was quick, almost imperceptible, but Joseph felt it. He pulled his hand away and looked at the snake, a near-perfect mimic of the multi-banded krait. But this wasn't a mimic, it was a real krait, one of the most venomous species in the world. Its bite carried neurotoxin venom capable of shutting down the body's motor functions and breathing. Joseph processed what had just happened, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Despite the venom's fast-acting nature, Joseph remained remarkably composed. He had faced life-threatening situations before, including an incident where a spitting cobra nearly blinded him, so he relied on his experience and training. He knew the protocol: stay calm, assess the situation, and seek help. Carefully inspecting himself for bite marks, he found none, which reassured him initially. In his characteristic style, Joseph joined his team for breakfast, using humor to ease any tension, cracking jokes as if nothing had happened. However, beneath the lighthearted demeanor, a subtle unease lingered. Hoping to shake off the growing discomfort, he decided to lie down for a nap after breakfast, believing some rest might help him feel better. When he woke at about 8 a.m., the tingling in his arm had spread. His fingers began to tremble and his movements slowed. Joseph recognized the signs of the neurotoxin's effect. He knew this could be fatal if left untreated. His team sprang into action, sending 2 assistants on a frantic journey to the nearest town to call for help. But Myanmar's strict regulations meant there was no satellite phone on site, and the promised radio phone had never arrived. Joseph, ever the scientist, didn't panic. Instead, he calmly predicted what would happen to him next. He explained to his team in writing that they would have to help him breathe if he lost the ability to do so. As the hours passed, Joseph's condition worsened. His breathing became more labored and his speech grew slurred. When he could no longer speak, he wrote messages, including one that advised his team to hold his head upright and warned them that vomiting could be dangerous. The team tried everything they could. 2 more assistants were sent out in search of help, but the torrential rains made travel nearly impossible. Hours passed, and despite their best efforts, the team had no way to get Joseph the help he needed. The heavy rains had made it impossible for a helicopter to land. The team continued to keep Joseph alive, taking turns breathing for him through a simple improvised method. They held him through the night, taking shifts, keeping him alive for 26 hours despite the odds. By the time the helicopter finally managed to reach them, it was too late. Joseph's pulse had already stopped. Despite 3 hours of CPR, there was no reviving him. Joseph Slowinski, a man who had dedicated his life to the study of the very snakes that had ultimately taken his life, passed away in the jungles of Myanmar, far from home. He was 38 years old. The news of his death was a blow to the scientific community, especially those who had known him personally. Joseph had lived his life for the pursuit of knowledge, with a particular love for the creatures that most people feared. His passing marked the loss of a brilliant mind, a passionate educator, and a fearless adventurer. To his team, he was more than just a mentor, he was a friend, a man whose zest for life and nature had inspired them all. It was early in the morning on October 21, 2022, when Jara, a 54-year-old grandmother, left her home in the village of Batara on the island of Sumatra. The sky was still dark, with only the moon casting a pale glow through the dense jungle. Jara had worked in the rubber plantations for decades. For her, the long, grueling hours under the scorching midday sun had become a way of life. The plantation was vast, its rows of rubber trees stretching as far as the eye could see. Jara's job as a trapper required her to cut diagonal slashes into the thick bark of the trees, collecting the rubber that dripped out into waiting containers. It was hard, physical work, but it paid the bills. Jara's family, like many others in the region, depended on her income. Though she worked tirelessly every day, her earnings were modest. With an additional side job and a relentless schedule of working 7 days a week, she managed to bring in just $55. Even after years of labor, Jara's position at the plantation was precarious, as she was considered a day laborer with no formal contractor benefits. There was no job security, no promise of better pay or retirement. Yet she pressed on, as many others in her village did, because the needs of her family left little room for anything else. The rubber plantation was nestled in Jambi province, a place of incredible natural beauty. Surrounded by the Barisan Mountains and volcanic peaks, the area was rich with lush green valleys and meandering rivers. However, this breathtaking landscape had been slowly changing over the years. Since the year 2000, Indonesia had lost 18% of its tree cover, much of it to deforestation for agriculture. Plantations such as Jara's had been established to cultivate crops like rice, tobacco, palm oil, and rubber, further encroaching on the wildlife-rich environment that had once flourished here. By the time Jara arrived at the plantation that morning, the sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft light over the landscape. She signed in and got to work. With a practiced hand, she carefully made the slashes into the rubber trees, the knife sharp and steady. She moved quickly, anticipating the steady drip of rubber, which she would collect into small plastic cups or coconut shells. The hours passed as she continued her work, her focus entirely on the task at hand. She had no idea she wasn't alone in the dense undergrowth. Unseen, a large python was silently closing in, its movements hidden in the shadows. The first sign of danger came when a sharp, stabbing pain shot through her back, making her stumble forward as her knife clattered to the ground. Before she could react, something massive coiled tightly around her body. Jara was shocked as she realized the enormity of the creature now wrapping itself around her. The python's thick, muscular coils constricted tighter and tighter, pulling her down to the ground. Panic surged through her body, but there was little she could do to free herself. The snake's grip was relentless. Her arms were pinned to her sides, and no matter how much she squirmed or struggled, the python only squeezed harder, its grip like a vice. Jara's sandals slipped off her feet as she kicked and writhed, her headscarf falling from her head and settling silently into the dirt. Her chest heaved in desperate attempts to breathe, but the pressure was suffocating. She could feel the life draining from her with each agonizing second as the snake's coils continued to tighten around her. Her lungs burned and the world began to fade. She knew there was no escaping. Within minutes, Jara was dead, alone in the rubber plantation, the victim of an attack she could not have anticipated. When the snake was sure its prey was no longer struggling, it loosened its grip, uncoiling from Jara's lifeless body. The python moved slowly, its unblinking eyes fixed on her. Its jaws began to stretch wider, far wider than a human's head, as the snake prepared to consume its meal. The process was slow and methodical as the snake's mouth enveloped Jara's body. The giant predator worked its way over her shoulders, her head, and down her torso. By the end of the day, the massive snake had consumed Jara entirely. Her body swallowed whole, leaving no trace behind but the empty space where she had once stood. As evening fell and Jara failed to return home, her husband grew worried. He knew the path she took each day through the jungle to the plantation, and he set off to find her, calling her name as he walked through the rows of rubber trees. He came upon her belongings, her jacket, sandals, and knife, lying abandoned on the ground. There was no sign of her, no sound of her voice. Panic settled in, and he raced back to the village to gather help. A group of villagers joined him, and together they searched through the plantation well into the night. But as darkness deepened, they were forced to return home, defeated, unsure of where to turn next. Jara's husband reported her missing to the local police, and the search continued the next day. He led the officers to the spot where he had found her belongings, and the search resumed in earnest. But it wasn't until 2 days later that a local villager stumbled upon a shocking discovery: a giant reticulated python nearly 20 feet long, lying motionless in the grass. The snake's body was grotesquely bloated, clearly engorged with something large. The villagers reacted in horror as they realized the enormity of what had transpired. Under orders from the police chief, the python's body was carefully cut open. As the snake's body split open from head to tail, the onlookers recoiled in shock. Jara's body, completely intact, spilled out onto the ground. It was a gruesome and terrifying revelation, one that would haunt her family for the rest of their lives. In the wake of Jara's death, villagers recalled reports of an even larger snake, a python estimated to be 27 feet long, spotted in the area recently. Attempts had been made to capture it, but the snake had managed to evade capture, slithering back into the surrounding forest. The discovery of such a massive snake living near their homes filled the villagers with fear, knowing that their lives were being increasingly intruded upon by these creatures. September 3, 2016 began with a gentle mist hanging over the rice paddies of Chiang Rai, Thailand. The early harvest season had brought the entire community to the fields, including 13-year-old Molly Ratanpong and her grandparents. Molly was the pride of her family, bright, hard-working, and unfailingly kind. Unlike many children her age who dreamed of escaping to Bangkok, Molly loved the rhythm of rural life. She excelled in school, particularly mathematics and science. Her teachers often told her parents she could earn a university scholarship if she continued her diligent work. This particular harvest had begun early due to concerns about approaching storms. The entire village had mobilized, with families working from dawn until dusk to bring in the crop that would sustain them through the coming year. As the sun began to disappear, Molly's grandparents called for her to stop her work, but she refused to. She wanted to continue, which her family agreed to, knowing she never got home late. Molly set down her basket of cut rice and headed toward the canal that separated their family's paddy from the neighboring field. The narrow waterway was lined with thick vegetation, a mix of tall grasses, bamboo, and tangled shrubs that provided habitat for the frogs, snakes, and small mammals that were part of the rice field ecosystem. As she approached the spot where she'd left her sickle, the fading light made it difficult to see clearly. Molly stepped carefully along the muddy bank, mindful of her footing on the slippery surface. She reached down to grab the sickle, her fingers just brushing the handle. What Molly couldn't see in the gathering dusk was the massive reticulated python that had been watching her approach. The 16-foot snake had been hiding in the thick brush along the canal, its patterned skin providing perfect camouflage among the shadows and vegetation. Reticulated pythons are among the world's longest snakes, capable of growing over 20 feet in length. Though primarily nocturnal, they hunt whenever opportunity presents itself. Their distinctive net-like pattern of scales creates perfect camouflage in dappled light, and their incredible strength allows them to subdue prey many times their weight. Unlike venomous snakes that kill with toxins, pythons kill by constriction, tightening their powerful muscles around the victim's chest each time they exhale, gradually preventing the lungs from expanding. Contrary to popular belief, pythons don't crush prey but rather cause death through cardiac arrest by preventing normal blood circulation. As Molly bent to retrieve her sickle, the python struck with explosive force. There was no warning, no rattle, no hiss, just the lightning-fast lunge of powerful muscles that had evolved over millions of years to capture prey. Molly, small for her age at just under 5 feet tall and weighing about 85 pounds, represented potential prey for the large python. In the dim twilight, the snake may have mistaken her for a smaller animal, or perhaps it was simply opportunistic. The snake's head hit Molly with such force that she was knocked off balance, falling backward into the muddy bank. Before she could scream, the python's body was wrapping around her torso, powerful coils tightening with each of Molly's panicked breaths. Her initial cry was cut short as the constriction forced air from her lungs. The python's grip tightened methodically, not crushing bones as commonly believed, but preventing Molly from drawing breath, slowly suffocating her while cutting off blood flow to her brain. With each heartbeat, the coils tightened further. Molly struggled desperately, her hands clawing at the muscular coils, her feet kicking at the muddy bank. But the python's strength was overwhelming, its grip implacable. The snake began dragging her toward the denser vegetation, an instinctual behavior when capturing prey. Back at the main field, Molly's grandparents finished packing their tools, assuming their granddaughter had already started walking home ahead of them. It wasn't until they returned to the village and spoke with the neighbors that they found out Molly had not returned home yet. The explanation sent a chill through him. Molly was never late, never irresponsible. Something was wrong. They immediately gathered flashlights and called neighbors. Within minutes, a search party had formed. Men and women from nearby homes, armed with lights and calling Molly's name as they retraced the path from the rice fields. They reached the family's paddy and spread out, searching methodically. Molly's grandpa headed straight for the canal where his daughter had reportedly gone to retrieve her sickle. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the muddy bank. The sickle lay where Molly had spotted it, partially submerged in the mud at the water's edge. Nearby, the ground showed signs of a struggle, disturbed mud, flattened grass, and a single sandal that Molly's grandpa recognized as his granddaughter's. The search party converged on the spot, their lights scanning the area. One of the men, a former hunter named Chai, noticed the drag marks leading into the thick vegetation along the canal. With machetes, the men began cutting through the dense undergrowth, following the disturbed path. They had gone about 20 feet when Chai's flashlight illuminated a scene from a nightmare. The massive python lay coiled around Molly's motionless form. Unlike sensationalized stories, the snake had not yet begun to swallow her. Pythons typically wait hours after a kill before beginning to consume large prey. Instead, it remained tightly wrapped around her body, still applying pressure even though Molly had already succumbed to asphyxiation. Molly's grandpa's anguished cry echoed across the fields. The men rushed forward, machetes raised. The python, disturbed by the lights and noise, attempted to retreat deeper into the vegetation, still gripping its prey. Chai, acting on instinct and rage, brought the machete down on the snake's neck, severing its head with a single powerful stroke. The massive body continued to writhe and coil for several minutes, a reflex action that continued even after death. When they finally managed to unwrap the python's massive coils from Molly's body, it was clear she had been dead for at least an hour. Her face was peaceful, almost as if she were sleeping, but her lips had turned blue from lack of oxygen. News of the tragedy spread quickly through the province. By morning, local wildlife authorities had arrived to investigate, confirming that the python was 18 feet long. It was large but not exceptional for the species, which can reach over 20 feet in the wild. Experts noted that the snake was healthy and in its prime, likely having established a territory along the canal where small mammals came to drink. The incident sent shockwaves through the community. Farmers were advised to work in pairs and avoid the canal areas during dawn and dusk when pythons are most active. Wildlife biologists explained that such attacks were extremely rare. Reticulated pythons, despite their size, typically avoid humans and prefer natural prey like monkeys, pigs, and deer. The attack on Molly was an anomaly, a tragic intersection of human and animal territories in a changing landscape where agricultural development increasingly encroached on wildlife habitat. Molly's tragic death serves as a sobering reminder that even in areas where humans have cultivated the land for generations, wild predators still maintain territories and hunting patterns that occasionally intersect with human activity, often with devastating consequences. It was April 18, 2016, and the humid Florida evening air hung heavy around the small strip mall in Jacksonville where Tommy Valdez ran his exotic pet store. The shop, squeezed between a laundromat and the check-cashing business, had been his dream for nearly a decade, but lately it felt more like a nightmare. Inside, the familiar sounds of bubbling aquariums and rustling reptiles filled the cramped space, while fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across rows of terrariums and snake enclosures. At 33, Tommy had been working with exotic reptiles for 9 years, building his reputation among collectors and enthusiasts throughout North Florida. His store specialized in rare snakes and lizards, catering to customers willing to pay premium prices for unusual specimens. But the exotic pet market had grown increasingly competitive, and recent months have been brutal for his small business. Online retailers were undercutting his prices, local regulations were tightening, and expensive veterinary bills had drained his savings account. The centerpiece of Tommy's collection was Titan, a massive female reticulated python he had acquired 3 years earlier as a juvenile. She had grown into a magnificent specimen, 22 feet of pure muscle and predatory instinct, weighing nearly 250 pounds. Tommy had turned down multiple offers from private collectors, but now, facing bankruptcy and mounting debts, he had finally agreed to sell her to a wealthy collector in Miami. Reticulated pythons are among the world's longest snakes, capable of reaching lengths over 30 feet and weights exceeding 300 pounds. Native to Southeast Asia, they're powerful constrictors known for their aggressive temperament and opportunistic feeding behavior. While not native to Florida, reticulated pythons were legal to keep in captivity with proper permits, making them popular among exotic pet owners and reptile dealers before Florida's reptile of concern laws were tightened in 2010. Unlike their more docile cousins, reticulated pythons retain their wild instincts even in captivity, viewing anything that moves as potential prey. Their strike speed is exceptional, and their constricting power can generate over 90 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush bones and stop a human heart within minutes. That evening, Tommy had stayed late to prepare Titan for transport to her new owner, who was scheduled to pick her up the following morning. The massive python hadn't been fed in over 2 weeks, partly due to Tommy's financial constraints, and partly because he wanted her to be more manageable during the transfer. But hungry reticulated pythons are notoriously unpredictable, and Tommy's cost-cutting measures had eliminated the assistant who usually helped him handle the larger snakes. Tommy entered Titan's enclosure carrying a large shipping container, planning to coax the massive snake inside for transport. The python was coiled in the far corner of her custom-built habitat, her distinctive diamond-patterned scales catching the overhead lights. Her head was raised in alert, tongue flicking rapidly as she sensed Tommy's approach. The attack came with devastating swiftness. Titan struck like a coiled spring releasing, her massive head covering the distance between them faster than Tommy could react. Her powerful jaws clamped around his torso as her body began wrapping around him with terrifying efficiency. Tommy's startled cry was cut short as 250 pounds of muscle coiled around his chest and arms, the python's grip tightening with each breath he tried to take. The constriction was methodical and relentless. Titan's coils worked in waves, each loop of her body finding purchase around Tommy's ribcage, waist, and neck. The pressure was immense, far beyond what the human body could withstand. Tommy's ribs began cracking under the strain as the python's muscles contracted in powerful pulses, each squeeze tighter than the last. His struggles only triggered the snake's instincts to constrict harder, her grip becoming a deadly vice that compressed his chest cavity and cut off his air supply. Within minutes, Tommy's movement ceased as the python's crushing embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. But Titan wasn't finished. Over the next several hours, the massive snake began the slow, methodical process of consumption. Her jaws unhinged with mechanical precision, stretching impossibly wide as she worked Tommy's body head first into her throat. Tommy's body wasn't discovered until 3 days later, when regular customers found the store closed during normal business hours and called police for a welfare check. Officers discovered the gruesome scene in the back room. Titan coiled contently in her enclosure, her body grotesquely swollen from her massive meal, with only Tommy's legs still visible protruding from her jaws. The Jacksonville Police Department's investigation ruled the death accidental, citing improper handling procedures and the victim's decision to work alone with an extremely dangerous animal. Animal control officers removed all the reptiles from the store, with Titan being relocated to a licensed facility after veterinarians safely extracted Tommy's remains. Tommy's death sent shockwaves through Florida's exotic pet community, where he had been well known and respected despite his recent financial troubles. His funeral was attended by dozens of fellow dealers and collectors who remembered him as passionate but increasingly desperate in his final months. It was a warm August evening in 2013 when Connor and Noah Barth, two young brothers, set off for what they thought would be another carefree day of childhood adventure in their quiet town of New Brunswick, Canada. The air was thick with the scent of summer, and their laughter echoed as they made their way to the nearby apartment of a close friend. Life, full of promise and innocence, seemed endless. Little did they know this day, which began like any other, would take a tragic turn no one could have anticipated. The boys, with their boundless energy, had spent the day at a local farm feeding animals and exploring the outdoors. It was a day of simple joys. Afterward, they returned to the apartment, eager to relax before heading back home. The apartment, situated above a reptile store called Reptile Ocean, belonged to Jean-Claude Cisse, a man known in the neighborhood for his extensive knowledge of reptiles. It was a small store, nothing remarkable from the outside. but it housed a variety of exotic creatures, each more intriguing than the last. Jean-Claude was a well-meaning man, passionate about the reptiles he cared for. Among them was a massive 13-foot African rock python, a serpent whose presence in the store was awe-inspiring. It was a creature of power, one that commanded both respect and fear. Jean-Claude had taken the snake in years earlier, after it was found by the Canadian Wildlife Service. The snake had been in a search for a new home after being turned down by the nearby Magnetic Hill Zoo in Moncton. The zoo, unable to provide a proper enclosure, had rejected the python, and Jean-Claude, eager to care for the creature, brought it to his store. Jean-Claude had built an elaborate glass tank for the python, one that spanned from the floor to the ceiling of the apartment. The snake, although large, seemed contained. But what Jean-Claude didn't realize was that the province of New Brunswick had laws prohibiting the ownership of such dangerous animals, and he didn't have the necessary permits to house the python. His oversight, along with a series of careless decisions, set the stage for a disaster no one could have imagined. On that fateful evening, after a day filled with laughter and carefree fun, Connor and Noah found themselves in the living room of Jean-Claude's apartment. Jean-Claude, the father of one of their friends, often welcomed the boys to spend time there. His son had already retreated to his bedroom, leaving Connor and Noah alone in the cozy but now silent living room. The day's adventures had worn them out, and they soon drifted off into a peaceful sleep. Unbeknownst to them, a lurking danger was steadily drawing closer, ready to shatter their tranquility. What no one knew was that in the dead of night, the python had managed to escape its enclosure. The snake, after years of captivity, had been quietly plotting its freedom. The glass tank, although sturdy, was not impenetrable. The lid, which had been loosened over time, finally gave way. The python, with remarkable precision, slid out of its enclosure and made its way across the room. The snake moved with silent grace, guided by its instincts, slipping past furniture and obstacles with ease. It was heading for the vent in the ceiling, a vent that had recently been left exposed when Jean-Claude removed the filter cap to clean it. The snake, drawn by some unknown scent, slithered through the ceiling vent. It was a small opening just large enough for the serpent's slender head to squeeze through. But the snake, determined to explore further, pushed its entire body into the duct system, its muscles flexing as it navigated the narrow space. It moved slowly, methodically, without a sound. The ceiling, which had already been under strain from the weight of the snake, was now in danger of giving way. Above the sleeping boys, the snake maneuvered carefully, its massive body bending and shifting within the confined space. The ductwork creaked under the weight, the sound barely audible in the stillness of the night. It was only a matter of time before the ceiling couldn't hold any longer. Suddenly, with a loud crack, the ceiling buckled. The snake, now free from the confines of the vent, fell to the floor with a heavy thud. It landed directly on top of the boys, who were still in a deep sleep, unaware of the danger that had just descended upon them. The python, disoriented but powerful, immediately coiled around the boys. Its body, thick and unyielding, began to tighten with terrifying force. Connor and Noah woke in an instant, their eyes wide with shock as they found themselves trapped beneath the massive coils of the snake. Panic surged through them, but their movements were slowed by the overwhelming power of the python. The creature's grip was relentless, squeezing harder with each passing moment. The boys fought against the constriction, but the snake's strength was too much. Their screams went unheard, swallowed by the weight of the snake's coils. The python's constriction continued, each breath they took becoming more difficult until the room fell silent once again. By morning, when Jean-Claude arrived at the apartment, the silence was deafening. He stepped into the room, his heart racing as he scanned the space. The ceiling had collapsed and the boys lay motionless, their bodies bruised and lifeless beneath the snake's powerful grip. Jean-Claude rushed to them, his hands shaking as he checked for signs of life, but it was too late. The boys were gone, their lives stolen by the very creature Jean-Claude had worked so hard to care for. Blood stained the floor and the snake was nowhere to be found. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the small town. Medical examiners confirmed the cause of death, asphyxiation caused by the snake's constriction. The python had wrapped itself around the boys, suffocating them before they could escape. In the wake of the attack, questions began to surface. Was this simply an unfortunate accident, or was there something more at play? The experts suggested that the snake would not typically act aggressively unless it felt threatened. But how could this happen? As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Jean-Claude's decisions had played a crucial role in the tragedy. His failure to secure the snake properly, lack of permits, and disregard for safety contributed to the loss. Authorities charged him with criminal negligence, though the case dragged on for years. In 2015, nearly 2 years after the deaths, Jean-Claude stood trial. His defense argued there was no intent to harm, but the evidence told another story. Despite the case against him, in November 2016, a jury found him not guilty. For the Barth family, no verdict could ease the pain of losing Connor and Noah. Their smiles, frozen in time, became painful reminders of lives cut short. What began as a day of adventure ended in heartbreak, leaving a family to mourn the loss of 2 young boys taken too soon. The morning of May 14, 2022 began with heavy rain pounding the windows of Devon Blakely's suburban home on Australia's Gold Coast. The 29-year-old exotic snake owner had planned to spend the day maintaining his collection, a hobby that consumed his life for the past 7 years. Devon was known throughout the reptile enthusiast community for his extensive knowledge and growing collection of venomous species. Friends described him as meticulous about safety, always emphasizing proper handling techniques to fellow collectors. His pride and joy was a room specifically converted for housing his collection, a temperature-controlled space with reinforced doors and specialized enclosures for over a dozen venomous snakes. Among them was his newest acquisition, an inland taipan. The inland taipan possesses venom 50 times more toxic than that of a cobra. A single bite contains enough venom to kill 100 adult humans, with its cocktail of neurotoxins, hemotoxins, and myotoxins attacking multiple body systems simultaneously. In the wild, these snakes are actually shy and reclusive, rarely encountering humans in their remote desert habitat. His girlfriend always worried that he may go too far with his collection, but she couldn't stop him, eventually letting him have his freedom in these animals. She convinced herself that Devon was experienced enough to know how to handle these reptiles. Devon had been waiting for months for the proper permits to keep this particular species, and he had only received the snake 2 weeks prior. The inland taipan, also known as the fierce snake, was paradoxically known for its shy, reclusive nature in the wild. Despite possessing the world's most potent venom, these snakes rarely encountered humans in their remote desert habitat in central East Australia. Obtaining the proper permits for keeping such a dangerous species had been a bureaucratic nightmare. Devon had completed specialized handling courses, installed additional security measures, and submitted to regular inspections. The final piece, a supply of specific taipan antivenom to keep on site, was still caught in red tape. The Wildlife Authority had promised it would be delivered within the week, but Devon couldn't wait to begin working with his new prize. That rainy Saturday morning, Devon's girlfriend went grocery shopping while he went on with cleaning the snake enclosure. Devon entered his snake room to perform routine maintenance. He was particularly careful with the taipan enclosure, using a snake hook as he'd done countless times before. But professional handlers know that taipans should never be manipulated with hooks alone. The proper procedure involves guiding them into clear tubes where they can be safely contained without directly handling. But Devon, perhaps overconfident from his years of experience with other species, attempted to guide the taipan with just his hook. He carefully opened the enclosure, snake hook in his right hand, clear acrylic shield in his left. Standard safety protocol. The taipan was hiding in its favorite spot, beneath a small artificial cave. Devon gently touched the snake's midsection with his hook, intending to guide it into the temporary container. The taipan, however, had other ideas. With the explosive speed characteristic of its species, the snake shot forward, not toward the container, but along the edge of the enclosure. Devon reacted quickly, adjusting his hook to redirect the animal, but in doing so, he momentarily lowered his acrylic shield. It was all the opening the taipan needed. The snake launched itself upward with incredible precision, sailing past the hook and striking Devon's exposed wrist just below his protective glove. The fangs sank deep, delivering a massive dose of venom before Devon could even register what had happened. The feeding schedule indicated the taipan was due for a meal, and Devon prepared accordingly, knowing that hungry snakes were often more aggressive. What happened next was pieced together from the scene discovered later. While manipulating the enclosure, Devon apparently misjudged the taipan's position. The snake, quick and agile despite its typically calm demeanor, evaded the hook and struck, sinking its fangs into Devon's wrist between his protective glove and sleeve. Following his emergency protocols, Devon attempted first aid, applying a pressure bandage to the bite site. He had been waiting for a specialized anti-venom delivery that had been delayed due to licensing requirements. Without this crucial antidote on hand, Devon's situation quickly became dire. The inland taipan's venom was primarily neurotoxic, but also contains powerful hemotoxins and myotoxins. Unlike the black mamba's fast-acting neurotoxins, the taipan's venom typically took longer to manifest severe symptoms, usually 2 to 6 hours without treatment. This gave victims a larger window for medical intervention, but once symptoms progressed, the outcome was equally fatal. His girlfriend, returning from shopping approximately 30 minutes after the bite occurred, found Devon collapsed on the floor of the snake room, already showing signs of envenomation. His breathing was labored and he was experiencing intense abdominal pain, early symptoms of taipan envenomation. She immediately called emergency services. The paramedics arrived within 12 minutes of the call, remarkably fast, but the taipan venom worked faster. The paramedics worked efficiently, establishing an IV, administering oxygen, and preparing him for immediate transport. They confirmed what Devon already knew. They didn't carry taipan antivenom. It would be waiting at the hospital, they assured him. Devon Blakely was pronounced dead at Gold Coast University Hospital approximately 3 hours after the bite. The taipan antivenom arrived by helicopter 20 minutes after his death, a cruel timing that haunted Melissa for years afterward. It was August 7, 2015, and the Borneo rainforest pulsed with life in the sweltering afternoon heat. Deep in the remote interior of Sarawak, Malaysia, where the jungle canopy blocked most sunlight and the air hung thick with moisture and the calls of exotic birds, experienced guide Ahmad Hassan moved carefully along an animal trail he had never explored before. The sounds of the rainforest surrounded him. The distant whoops of orangutans, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, and the constant buzz of insects. This was exactly the kind of pristine wilderness that drew adventure tourists from around the world, and Ahmad was always searching for new routes to offer his clients. At 41, Ahmad had been leading tourists through Borneo's rainforest for 15 years, building a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable and fearless guides in the region. He had survived encounters with king cobras, saltwater crocodiles, and aggressive orangutans, earning the respect of both clients and fellow guides. His intimate knowledge of jungle survival and animal behavior had saved lives on multiple occasions, and he took pride in his ability to handle any dangerous situation the rainforest could present. This solo scouting expedition was part of Ahmad's preparation for a new ecotourism route that would take adventurous clients deeper into the jungle than most tour operators dared to venture. He had been hiking for 3 hours, mapping GPS coordinates and noting potential campsites, when he encountered an obstacle that would test his jungle expertise in the most deadly way possible. Reticulated pythons are the apex predators of Southeast Asian rainforests, capable of growing to enormous sizes in the prey-rich environment of Borneo. These massive constrictors are ambush hunters that can remain motionless for hours before striking with explosive speed. They're excellent swimmers and climbers, equally at home in trees or water, and their hunting territory can span several square miles. When hungry or threatened, they become extremely aggressive, viewing any large, warm-blooded animal as potential prey. Blocking the narrow trail ahead was a massive male reticulated python, easily 19 feet long and as thick as a telephone pole. The snake was stretched across the path, his dark brown and gold patterns perfectly camouflaged against the fallen leaves and dappled sunlight. Ahmad estimated the pythons weighed at over 300 pounds, making this one of the largest specimens he had encountered in his years of guiding. The snake appeared sluggish in the heat, but his head was raised and alert, tongue flicking as he sensed Ahmad's approach. Ahmad had encountered large pythons before and knew they were generally not aggressive toward humans unless threatened or extremely hungry. His usual procedure was to give them a wide berth and to find an alternate route, but the terrain here was too dense for easy detours, and he was eager to complete his survey before dark. Instead of retreating, he decided to encourage the snake to move by prodding it with a long stick, a technique that had worked with smaller pythons in the past. The python's response was immediate and devastating. The moment Ahmad's stick made contact, the massive snake exploded into motion with shocking speed. His enormous head whipped around and struck Ahmad in the chest, knocking him backward off the trail. Before Ahmad could recover, 300 pounds of muscle was wrapping around his body, the python's coils encircling his torso and legs with crushing force that drove the air from his lungs. The attack continued with methodical precision. The python's powerful body dragged Ahmad off the trail into dense undergrowth, where the snake's natural advantages became overwhelming. Ahmad's desperate attempts to reach his radio were cut short as the python's coils tightened around his chest, compressing his ribcage and making breathing impossible. The constriction increased with each of Ahmad's struggles, the snake's muscles responding to movement with increased pressure. Ahmad's ribs cracked audibly under the immense pressure as the python's grip tightened like a living vice. His spine compressed as the snake's coils worked their way around his neck and torso, cutting off blood flow to his brain while simultaneously crushing his internal organs. Within minutes, Ahmad's movement ceased as the massive python's embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. The consumption process began immediately. The python's jaws unhinged with mechanical precision, stretching impossibly wide as the snake began working Ahmad's body head first into its throat. The process took several hours, the python's elastic gullet expanding to accommodate prey much larger than its head. By dawn, Ahmad had disappeared entirely into the massive snake's digestive system. Ahmad's tour company began searching when he failed to return from his scouting expedition. Search teams found his GPS unit and torn clothing scattered along the trail a week later, but his body was never recovered. Local wildlife officials conducted a brief investigation, ruling his disappearance an occupational hazard of jungle guiding in remote areas. The incident prompted new safety protocols for tour operators in Sarawak, requiring guides to work in pairs when scouting remote areas, and to carry emergency beacons when venturing into unexplored territory. Ahmad's family received compensation from his employer's insurance policy, and a scholarship fund was established in his name for young Malaysians pursuing careers in ecotourism. If these shocking snake attacks left you stunned, click the next video now for more dangerous reptile encounters.